Yeah. Hello. Welcome to our stream. How's that working out? Voice. Is it? Great. See you in a couple of minutes when we get pizza. Welcome to our May/June PyLadies meetup. That was sadly postponed last time, but really happy that you could make it now. And thanks for hosting us, Maren, and the Deutsche Bahn. And I'll first tell you a bit about PyLadies, what we are, who we are, what we do, how you can join us if you want to. And then we have two wonderful talks. In terms of agenda, you all arrived. I'm doing community announcements. Then we'll have a quick introduction from Max, I think, from Deutsche Bahn. Then we'll learn more about salary predictions in Klea. And then we'll learn more from Maren about how to increase diversity in open source communities. I've already heard that talk, that's great. The salary one I heard as well, it's also great. Then we'll do some networking and friends and more pizza and more drinks. So we're PyLadies, and PyLadies exists all around the world. We have different chapters in many different cities. So we're the Berlin chapter, if you come from a different city and there's no chapter, feel free to create one. We'll try to support you as much as we can. There are also guides, and yeah, and we're a huge community of 75 chapters and lots of members and countries, which I think is really great in terms of diversity. And so we are an international mentorship group for marginalized genders. So we want to kind of encourage more diverse people to get into Czech. And our mission is to promote and educate the diversity in the Python community, which we talked about earlier is better than in other communities. So it's kind of working, I think. And we aim to provide a friendly support network for gender minorities and a bridge to the larger Python world. So we also try to help you in any way we can. And PyLease Berlin was founded in 2013. We have 2,307 members. And in Germany, there are 6 chapters. And new ones come every year, I would say. We regularly host meetups, mostly monthly. So we try monthly meetups. And we have workshops, and we also have hackathon days, open source contributions, and we connect people to companies. And anything we can dream, we make happen, kind of, I would say. So our next meetup is on July the 11th. And it's also going to be similar to this, a member talk evening about modeling mental hoops from one word to the next with NLP and Python, and how to be a good reviewer, be honest, nice, and a badass, which I think is very great. Yeah, so if you have time on the 11th, please come by. And you can sign up, as usually, on Meetup. And if you want to get involved, we have monthly organizer meetings. The next one is on the 3rd. It's always the first Monday of the month at 6 p.m. And it's very chilled. It's remote. You can also just join in. You don't have to commit to anything. You can just see how it is. Like, we're open to all. If you want to kind of participate maybe in organizing things, then just join, and then you can also do small things. You don't have to do anything big. And we have a Slack channel. If you don't know, you can also scan this QR code, or you can just, I think here's a link, go to slackinpyladies.com, and then accept the invitation. And if you live in Berlin, join the Berlin, but we have many different cities as well. And you can also create your own PyLadies avatar if you're interested. That also increases diversity, and we use some of ours and like as diverse as possible creations in these slides as well, if you want us to. And we have a raffle today. So if you want to take part in a raffle, scan this QR code, sign up, and you can win prizes. You can, my favorite is there's a parrot you can win, which I think is really cool. And a book, obviously, the Python book, which is also very interesting. That's the main prize. We're waiting a second to have everybody scan the QR code. I'll hold it in camera as well. For everybody watching, this is how it looks like. You can get it if you come to the next meetup, maybe. No. No, you have to be here. But it's a great book, and you can get it online on any store, I think. Sorry. All done? And thank you, by the way, for Sorry for everybody watching. It's not very stable, the Wi-Fi, but we'll try. And we have Klea. Do I pronounce that correctly?
Klea.
Klea? All right. Thank you for being here. And you are young tech and data enthusiasts who spent some time on honing Python skills in cloud platforms, which I think is a very nice sentence. You have a formal education in computer and software engineering, and a master thesis made you switch to data science, which is the same for me, actually.
Yeah.
And we're very glad, because you can tell us more about what you do as a data scientist at StepStone. I'm really excited about that in a second. And we have Maren. Maren works as a machine learning engineer here at DB Systel. Systel? Systel? And you have a PhD in environmental science, which is pretty cool. You're self-taught, and you're an active contributor to open source. You do a lot for and to the open source community, especially to Scikit-learn. And you also are an organizer at PyLadies and are a very active member. So thank you for that. And thank you for having us. Get in touch with us. We have a feedback form, and you can also register to be a member of PyLadies. And now we have the introduction. Okay. Kannst du trotzdem den Link joinen, damit wir das broadcasten können?
So,
You have slides?
No.
I didn't bring any slides, but could we just use this one?
That also works.
Yeah.
If you need internet, I have a mobile hotspot now, so let me know.
I also
Hi, everyone. Whoa. Thank you for being here. Hope you enjoy some pizza. My name is Max. I'm from Deutsche Bahn IT recruitment team, and I'm here to give you some information on DB Systel and on the recruitment process we have and on the job openings we currently have. I start with giving you some information on DB Systel. What does DB Systel do? It's an in-house IT consulting business. So Deutsche Bahn is like a huge business, but it consists of several businesses. And if they need IT consulting or IT services, they usually come to DB Systel and they provide IT services. There's a podcast which is called IT at DB, and this gives you, there are like many episodes on DB Systel, and they're going to get a good grasp of the different projects within DB Systel. Unfortunately, it's not in English, but German.
You can continue. I just wasn't sure if people wanted to look at you as well on the screen.
I'm going to give you some hard facts on DB Systel. So DB Systel has approximately 6,000 employees, And the main locations are in Berlin, Frankfurt, and Erfurt. But we also have several other locations from Hamburg to Munich, from excuse me, from Cologne to Dresden. So there are several sites, and most people work remote. We have approximately 19 nationalities working in DB Systel, and a share of 24% of women. I know we still need to improve, but I think we're above average.
Average is 22%.
Pardon?
European average is 22%.
Okay, so we're slightly. I said teams work remotely and they work agile according to Scrum or Kanban, and the usual team size is 9 plus minus 2. So each team has one agile coach, one product owner, and the rest of the team members are technical workers like, developers or business engineers like these. We have flex work, so people can decide to come into the office or work from home. I mentioned most people are working remotely, and full time is 39 hours per week. Regarding vacation, we have 30 days annual leave, but employees can add up those days to 36 or 42. These were those facts on DB Systel, and now I'm going to let you know some details about our openings and the recruiting process. I just checked yesterday, and we actually have 321 openings at the moment. So we have quite a few openings and a big variety. So I would recommend checking out db.jobs. This is the job portal. And as I said, there are like a big variety of roles. I think there are no roles we are not looking for in IT. I myself recruit data roles. So from data consulting to data engineering to data science to machine learning engineer, DevOps engineers also wanted. I think what roles we are currently looking for most is data engineers and DevOps engineers. And you can also apply on db.jobs, which is our job portal. And the recruiting process, like me as a recruiter, I screen the profiles first and forward to the hiring manager. The hiring process also takes place remotely. So we usually have 1 round or 2 rounds, and onboarding also takes place remotely, except there are some teams who meet more often on site, others less. But usually, or most of the times, they work remotely. And I'm here after the talks. If you want to link in, just now, and I'm happy to give you more information on the recruiting process or whatever you want to know. Thank you.
For string. Nice. Okay, so thank you for having me, Pi Ladies. Thank you for coming today and hearing my talk. There was already an introduction about what it's going to be like, and we'll get a bit more into details later. But initially, I just wanted to set some very generic housekeeping rules. So I made aware of the fact that everyone here can have a different experience in Python and data science and machine learning in general. So I would classify the talk as, well, beginner to intermediate level. I would very much appreciate if we let the questions for the very end of the presentation, unless, and this is the asterisk, there is a question that is really crucial to the understanding of what's happening. So if there is a definition that you really don't know or don't know what to make of, feel free to just raise your hand and stop me, and I'll try to answer that question to the best of my capabilities. And other than that, yeah, let's just get going. So we'll talk about salary predictions and the science behind it, or at least how we solve it in StepStone. Before I get into that, a few words about my employer, which is StepStone. You might know us. We are a job platform, and we're aiming to make the best connection between a candidate and a potential employer, and so that a candidate finds their forever job. Hopefully, that's very optimistic nowadays, but a job they could feel accomplished in, and their employer has the access to the right talent. There are many tools that we use and many products that we have in our company to make this match even easier, and to make the user journey from that moment when they look for a job to the very end when they actually are invited to an interview or they get the job contract, as optimized as possible. And salary products are one of those ways. I will skim through this very quickly because that was made aware of already in the presentation. So it's very generic. Unless you have something in common with my free time interest, then feel free to hit me. We can talk about it later if you want. And other than that, let's start talking salary. So the salary landscape in the German job market. If you ever applied for a job in Germany, or if you know anything about the German culture when it comes to salaries, notice that it's not really the most open culture. It's a bit conservative, it's a bit secretive, and salary in particularly, it's a topic of massive controversy. It's a well-kept secret between employers and employees at times. It's a cultural thing. But it's also a crucial thing for the majority of the people who are looking for a job and are looking to be paid fairly, and especially if you're a newbie, if you have never worked before, this could make a significant impact in the rest of your career. Say, for instance, you from the beginning don't know the real value that you're worth, and you do a maybe bad negotiation with your employer, and you end up at a lower salary range, and it will take you many years, and you will never be able to make up for the lost money. So at StepStone, we tried to overcome this discrepancy between the lack of information in the market and what is really needed then for an optimal user journey and candidate journey. So what I'm saying here is yes, it is a topic of controversy, but it's crucial for candidates because you can make career decision on this, but also if you are an employer and you want to say allocate budget for a certain candidate, it is really helpful to know their salary expectations. So it really is an important tool to be used also on the other side. It's not just something that helps the candidates, although they are the first ones that experience this lack of knowledge. On the employer side, it is just as crucial. The year is 2018 when we first played around with the idea, fiddled a bit around with the idea of actually attempting to even make salary predictions in some form, or salary estimation, or at least get some sort of salary information out there so candidates can use it. And of course, our UX researchers did a few surveys here and there, and the results are really nothing that you would be surprised with. So it is the second most important thing that a candidate would like to see in a job listing, which was lacking. Like in Germany, you don't normally have this, but it's also the second most important reason for a person to change for an employer to change their career. So it's just a fancy graph to show up for that. So with that in mind, I will just jump a bit forward in time and to today and tell you what we have in place today. We have a few salary products in StepStone that you normally find if you're on our main page on this tiny icon that says "Earn More." If you click that, that's where you find us. And by us, I mean myself and my team who develop and maintain these products. There are a few, but I will focus, or well, at least just mention the two most important ones, which would be the salary planner, and the second one, the salary on listing. A few words about each of those. One of them is candidate oriented. The other one as well, but it's also a bit more on the company side, so on our client side. On the first one, it's a tailored questionnaire that you fill and you get information about your salary range, what you're worth, and so on. So you get to answer a few questions about yourself, about your current working situation, about your experience. And based on that, we try to estimate what you should be earning or what the market value is for that position and in that particular location, and with all of the rest of the criteria. The second one is a snippet actually, or like a screenshot that I took from one of our listings. So you see here, there is like global commercial product manager listing. So it's a listing that we have actually live on StepStone. And there you see a bit about the job and you see a salary range, and that is also coming from us in our product. So this is also an estimation that we make. It's not what the employer would be saying that this is the official salary range or the approved salary range for that role, is what we estimate that role is worth. Cool. Okay, so I'll now jump back in time in 2018 again. We want to solve lack of salary information, and we want to do that by maybe training a machine learning model to calculate salaries. You start with a very massive problem that everybody faces whenever they're trying to launch a new product, and it's like the typical, where do I get the data? So where do I get the data to actually train a model to predict salaries and then hopefully maybe collect more data? We decided that that would be the approach in the long term. So eventually we would collect more data once we had something out there. But initially we decided to rely on an external partner, on a scraping partner, and they provided us with around 50K entries that were just user data collected through questionnaires, through campaigns. It was, you can imagine, very messy. We were asking about a bunch of random things because we didn't really know what to ask for. We didn't really know what were those features that would impact the salary estimation the most, or the salary in general the most. So we asked a bunch of everything. And we had this initial data set, and we started in Germany because the culture in Germany is the one that really necessitates such products the most. Although we operate in other countries, you notice that in other countries, it's not as crucial. So from this point forward, I will be talking about how things developed in Germany, but you can assume that it didn't, or it wasn't that different in other markets. Question for you, maybe to think about, but also one of the questions that we constantly thought about. How many questions do we actually need? And how many questions are too many questions? Mm-hmm. Because whenever you're running a survey, you run into the risk of boring your users with too many questions, and they will just drop the questionnaire. And that is definitely something that we don't want. So it was always a constant change. It was always something that we added. We saw how the user reacted to that. We ran a few A/B tests. And we also checked if the feature in the end would have a massive impact on our predictions. And then we decided whether or not we would keep a certain question. So with that in mind, we landed on a refined salary questionnaire right now. That is quite lean, I would say. You can complete the questionnaire in 5 minutes if you're really quick, or even less. And that is what we have today. Few words about the user entered data. I will very briefly go through this. Might not be as exciting because it's just like running through the salary questionnaire, but just so you see that what it looks like and for you to understand what we do with it later. So we start asking about your current job situation, whether you're working full-time, part-time, or you have another working arrangements, how many hours you work per week. That is also something we'd like to know. And then we discuss about salary. As I said a bit earlier, we collect salary information with this questionnaire as well to actually power up further salary model refreshes. So we ask, well, salary information is literally just divided into 2 categories, the base salary and bonuses or variable income. So we do not make any further distinction between, I don't know, company bonus, parental money, Christmas bonus, company car, whatever. It's just the same. You just put all of them in one bucket. And you see here this question about how satisfied one is with their current salary. And this is just mainly optional, and it's mainly used by our researchers to write articles or to publish some developments in the market. Then we ask about the current working environment. And by that, we mean where the employer is. So the location in Germany, in this case, in which industry the employer is active. So we have a list of roughly, I think, 42 industries that we have normalized. And then we also ask a bit about the company size. So how many people work actually in the company that you're working in at the moment. We talk about experience and we ask about experience, and we want to know, obviously, your job title, like what is it that you do, and your years of experience. And then you see here 2 consecutive questions about management or responsibility for other people. Our research has really shown that, and I think it's also pretty intuitive, that if you are in charge of other people and if you manage a budget, that makes a difference in your salary. So we would like to know about that as well. And actually, there's also a drop down. So if you click on this, that yes, you are in charge of other people, you'll be prompted another question. Okay, how many people are you in charge of? So is it like 1 to 4? Is it more? Is it over 50 or something? So something like this. We ask a bit about education, but to be honest, only the first field is really important in terms of feature relevance for the salary model. So what's the highest level of education that you have achieved? The other 2 questions are purely for statistics and user studies. They are not really relevant in a market like Germany or in a country like Germany where all universities are sort of standardized. It doesn't really make a difference if you studied in Berlin or Munich or Aachen, I don't know. It might be a bit different in other countries like the UK, where you have like Ivy League or premium universities, but that's not really the case in Germany. And other than that, we collect some demographics. Just want to assure every one of you, this is nowhere used in the salary estimations, this type of information. We don't discriminate on age or gender. It's another demographic question, and especially the gender question we use to maybe like do research or write studies about possible gender bias in the industry, in particular job titles, and how it has developed through the years. So we collect this for study purposes, for research purposes. This will not impact your salary estimation. Okay, so we collected all that data, and now we get to do the fun part. So it's a very typical data science pipeline, if you ask me. We collect the salary data, as I said. We are actually, I mentioned Germany, but we're operating in UK, in Belgium, in Austria, and in Ireland. We're not live yet in Ireland for salary, but we have a model there somewhere offline. So we collect all of this data and then we do something with it. So we make certain that we have quality assurance processes in place So we have filtering in place, we have cleaning, we have like just deleting entire rational rows and so on. We have since, well, I think a couple of months now, it's already been a while, a new outlier detection process. It's like something really cool, really excited about. Now we do, well, of course, feature engineering. What's the most important feature? Like, how are we going to consume that? Do we need all of the features? Do we need all of the answers from the questionnaire that we actually collected? I will tell a bit more about this disclaimer. Like, I am leaving this as a teaser here, like this NAN model introduced as feature. This is actually the output of a large language model, and it's a dense vector representation of a job title, and that we consume that simply as a feature as it is, but more about it later. Just a teaser for now. We run experiments, of course, see how the metrics are for different configurations of parameters, hyperparameters, and then we end up with a salary prediction model that we will hopefully deploy if it fits all of the criteria for the quality checks. And this salary prediction model, actually, you'd be surprised, it's a very simple GBM model. So it might sound fancy, it's just a basic gradient boosting tree algorithm that would look under the hood exactly like any gradient boosting tree algorithms you think about, with a bunch of parameters that you can specify yourself. And like when you do hyperparameter tuning, like I'm showing here, you see the ranges that you can decide on, and like some of the parameters we care to tune actually. The question I get asked a few times already is whether or not we've thought about other approaches, whether it makes more sense to use another algorithm, maybe like there is something more sophisticated out there for this type of regression problems. And my answer to that is, well, it depends. So when we started in 2018, GBM was really state of the art for such regression problems, but also depending on the amount of data that you have, it doesn't necessarily make sense for you to start, say, building a neural network for solving your problem. You could very easily do that with a simple algorithm. And I will say that we've looked into that, and even though we've collected a lot more data now and our models are trained on roughly 800,000 data points for Germany anyway, it doesn't really make a lot of difference if you're using GBM or something more advanced. Actually, this still remains state of the art for this particular type of problem. So if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. Next, talking about data filtering. Yes, so we collected the data, and I'll tell you a bit more about the filters that we have in place. So we have a few types of filters in place, but like filter by relevance, country, and rationale. So relevance. So that implies, is it relevant to the time period that I actually want this salary estimation for? So if I'm refreshing a salary prediction model, and I have data in my data set already from way back 2018, is it still relevant to a post-pandemic market? Do I really want it? Probably not, right? We have filters by country. So I mentioned we operate in different countries, and we have salary models for different countries. These are specific separate models. And when you train a model, say for Germany, you will only have data collected through StepStone Germany. And same for Austria, same for Belgium, same from the UK. So you cannot just use one model to actually make predictions for all the different markets, and like there is leverage there. When it comes to the locations, there is a difference in the mentality of the people, the culture of the market. As I was mentioning, the UK is a lot more forward-leaning and open when it comes to salary information. So the market dynamics will be very different to Germany. Therefore, it really makes sense that we keep the models separate. So therefore, when we make the data filtering, we also like filter by country. And I was mentioning earlier, we filter by rationale. So actually, does this data point make any sense at all? Do we have any illogical entries? Is this entry even legal? Has this person maybe entered an illegal salary for their position? Maybe it's like below the national minimum that is allowed. We have a value for that in Germany, and actually in any other country, you're not allowed to be paid less than a certain amount of money. So we actually filter those out. And actually, if you're interested, I could show you, yes, this is a snapshot of a moment in time when I ran a filtering job. So you see on the middle column, there are the filters by name, and on the right side, you have the number of data points that were deleted by that filter. So in this particular case, we were training a salary prediction model only for full-timers. So anything else that was not a full-timer, we just deleted. And you see here, like, there were many data points that were deleted, more than 200,000. We filter by campaigns, by countries, as I said, like student planner is another type of planner that we have. It's something else. We filter surveys that are too old and not really relevant to the dynamics right now. We filter extreme salaries, meaning anything that is too low or too high, even if you think that in your particular case that might make sense. So you say you have, I don't know, a salary of 500,000 euros a year. And for that particular position that you might be holding, that makes sense. We quite frankly cannot be expected to estimate anything reasonable to that, because the bulk of our data, I think it still remains the salary bands from 30 to 80K, maybe 90K post-pandemic. So anything above a certain level, I think right now is 400,000. We just cut out and leave it out. We filter by irrational salaries and benefits ratio. So if you're just saying that, I mean, that can be improved, can be optimized, but if you say that you're earning in benefits 100 times what you earn as your base salary, maybe that's not really reasonable, and maybe that's not a case that we want to care about. It could be an outlier that makes sense, again, but we don't want to teach that to our model. Extreme age, of course, makes sense. Illogical age and experience, say someone says they're 18, but they have 25 years of experience, that's also probably not true. So that will be kicked out. We filter by illogical number of people responsible for. We filter also, and this is like outliers per job title. And this is the outlier detection that I just mentioned earlier. So for a particular job title that has enough representation in the data set, we use a modified z-score approach to actually kick out the values that are too far away from the median. I think right now, for Germany at least, it should be 2.5 standard distributions away from the median. So that's out. And then in the end, you see the number of entries after the filtering. So it's still nearly 850K. So it's still significant, especially considering that we started with our models live with around 50K. And that's the filtering. So I want to talk a bit here about the superpower, and I already see Jody in the public, like feeling like a proud parent about a product that she really contributed a lot in. And I think it's a superpower at the heart of StepStone, and what really sets us apart from many of our competitors, and that would be our ontology. So if you think about the ontology, or the job tech ontology in this particular case, think about a structure that organizes all registered job titles in disciplines, like similar job titles can be grouped together in a discipline. Subdisciplines maybe, a bit more granular, but not quite a job title yet, but also not quite a discipline. And therefore you have this representation that is like a relationship between the job titles without actually having to add anything else, without actually having to ask the users anything else. But I can tell you already from the information that we have in our ontology that a Java developer is closer as a job title to a Python developer than it is to a janitor, because our ontology says so. We do not simply leave these job titles alone and have them as completely separate entities because they have similarities, they have relationships between them. And this is what our ontology is trying to model. So to give you a very simplified example about a random job title, a data scientist, like the way that this node would look in our ontology would be like concept ID and then discipline, that's some discipline, and then subdiscipline ID. So every time you have your model refresh, you have a certain job title that was given to you by a user, you normalize that, and then you find where it falls in the ontology, and you already have a lot more information about that job title, and that helps you make even more accurate predictions. A few words about feature engineering. So I mentioned earlier, we're using LightGBM. It's a gradient boosting tree algorithm. It has a few advantages to other gradient boosting approaches, namely that we can, consume features as categoricals. We just can categorize features the way that we see fit. Sometimes we still want hot encode features because that's sometimes still necessary. We have numerical features that we use, and that's the easiest. So we ask about company size, a number of people that somebody's responsible for, a number of years of experience. That's a simple numerical feature. And then we have the dense vector representation. So that's what I teased a bit earlier. So we have a BERT model that was developed from a team in parallel to mine. It's tuned on StepStone listing data. So it has information about job titles and information about job descriptions as well. So what happens is that if we query this model with the certain job title, then we get a dense vector representation about that job title, that it's like, I think, a vector of size 50. And we just attach that vector as it is to the input data frame, and we just give it to the algorithm as it is. So it's something really cool and really simple that was made by somebody else, a team working in parallel to something totally different, and they have their own use case for that. But we just decided to give it a go, and it really makes a massive difference in terms of quality and accuracy metrics. A few words about our infrastructure, and I will use this schema that my colleague was so kind to let me share with you. We do everything on AWS, so from collecting the data, it's stored on an S3 bucket. We have processing jobs, filtering jobs on SageMaker. And as you see here, like we have experimentation, okay, when you start in the beginning, but then you have like collection of new batches of data, you have a filtering job in place, and the data that is then the result of that filtering job is saved in another S3 bucket. And then you can play around, either train the model or experiment more. If you train the model and you're happy with it, you might have an actual, like every time you're training a model, you might decide to save it and you have an actual model artifact. You can decide to deploy that if you're happy enough with it, with Lambda, or you continue your experimentation because you might not be quite there yet to the standards that your team is requiring. And once you have deployed your model, then it is made available for consumption via a SageMaker endpoint. And this, I think, what's also, I think that's quite encouraging because we started this process. It was, we initially started already with SageMaker, but the process, as you see it right now, the entire pipeline wasn't quite as concise as it is right now. So we had a lot of steps that we were doing manually, a lot of steps that we were doing locally, and we managed to migrate everything to AWS. And also we have this process entirely automated right now. So we will get a trigger for a model retrain every 60 days. We can select that parameter however we want. It's usually 60 days because that makes sense. You will have, every time there is this like 60 days time that has passed, you will have a filtering job triggered, you will have a hyperparameter tuning job triggered, you will have, so SageMaker will select then, based on the criteria that we have set, the best configuration for a training job. And then it will create a pull request, like this bot that we have is like our team pet. Will create a pull request and tell you that, okay, now I trained this new model. These are the accuracy metrics. These are the other metrics. Do you want me, like, do you like it? Are you happy with it? And if you click yes, and you merge that pull request, then you have it deployed automatically. And that's really cool, I think. So huge props to the engineers in my team that made this possible. Yeah. I think this is a nice segue into the next slide, to be honest, because I mentioned earlier that once the certain criteria has been reached, once certain quality metrics that we have selected have been reached. So what does that mean specifically for us? Because everything has to be a metric that we can actually mathematically make something of in order for SageMaker to make a difference between the different configurations. So when we talk about our main business KPIs, we care about accuracy, of course. It's a regression problem. We care about accuracy. Our main KPI that we present to business is a median proportional error, or that would be like the median error and predicted value by the other name. When we started attempting to even tackle this salary prediction problem, on the far end of the tunnel, there was this giant looming in front of us, and that was Glassdoor US. They already had models for salary estimations. Actually, they have data from people that actually use their site, and they have over 1 million entries. And they have predictions in place, and the number that they communicate for this particular KPI is 11%. And we thought, we'll probably never reach there. We'll probably never make it to 11% because it's Glassdoor US, they're really a giant. But we can try to steer a bit in that direction. And very recently, we're scratching the 12% mark. And I think that really tells a lot about the progress we've done in 5 years now. To be honest, I also think this will be the plateau, the point of saturation for us. We'll probably never make it past here, and it's already good enough, if you ask me, because if you recall all of the questions that we ask candidates in the questionnaire, we ask about your employer, but nowhere do we ask about your company name. That is a huge setback because we are not able to distinguish between two companies of the same size that work in the same industry and in the same city that might have very different paying ranges. That is no way for us to know that, therefore we have a bit more error there. We could get more out of it if we started asking people about their company name, but again, we operate in a very conservative market where people feel a bit secretive and might be a bit scary to give your company name. We are playing around with the idea. I'm giving this much of a spoiler, but it's no way near there yet. The other thing that we want from our models, besides them being actually accurate, it is for them to be able to, there was a temperature warning, okay. We want our models to be able to generalize. So we have this experimental setup where we ask, we set some hyperparameters, we check what the metrics are, we do cross-validation on tenfold, and we have like this in each fold, like this train test split and so on. And then we report the numbers that would be like the median value for each fold. But that still doesn't mean that you don't have bias in your input data, in the data you're training your model on. So how can you make certain that your model will be able to actually cope with the real data that the user will give if you don't track it? So this is the ability that, well, we call it, a generalization superpower of a model, which is basically just something based on feature importance distribution. So we've made a score out of it. if you've played around with feature importances, there are many formulas that you can use to calculate a feature importance. We've just settled with one, and the one that we have basically calculates the number of times a certain feature has been used in a split when a decision is being made while you're building a tree. And then you have certain values for each feature. And then we scale all of these numbers from a scale from 0 to 100, 100 being the feature that has been the most important. So whatever number that feature had is 100, and everything else that comes after that will be like something less. And then you will have this type of a ranked list of features and their relative feature importance distribution. And we always had the idea that we want a model to be able to generalize, but that means that we want a feature importance distribution that is sort of balanced. So the model is not mostly relying on that one first feature or the first two, but is actually evenly depending on other features as well. And we made a score out of this. Let me show you and illustrate a bit what I mean by that. So I was mentioning earlier, so this is the number of particular features used as a decision criteria for splits, and we scale it from 0 to 100. And a good model, how we define it, has both high accuracy and high generalization capacity. This is our first example. So this is a model, and these are the features that are being used in this model training run. So you see the first feature has the distribution, or like the feature importance that is being shown in the first column, and then you have the second feature and the third, and so on and so on. And after the sixth, actually, it doesn't really matter that much because you have like an end, you put an end to how deep you want your tree to go. So after that, it doesn't really make a lot of difference. And I would consider this, or we would consider this in our team, as a good distribution. Why? Because you're more or less evenly relying on a multiple number of features instead of just one. So we would accept this. We would not be so keen in accepting this one. You have a model here that really works. It might have a great accuracy score, but you see that it's heavily biased on the first feature. The first feature is significantly more important than the others. If we could, we would really like to avoid that. We don't always successfully avoid that, especially for markets where we have like smaller data sets, smaller representations. Sometimes it's not possible for us to completely avoid such things in production, but we would like not to have it. Something that seems like a cool trade-off is this one. So there's still a difference between the first most important and second most important feature, but it's less noticeable. It's a bit more balanced. So this is something that we would say, it's fine. If the model with this distribution had the highest accuracy, we would have no qualms in just deploying it as it is. Yeah, so you notice these are graphs. And like I'm talking about distributions and graphs and tables. So when you select an optimal configuration for a training job, you need a decision criteria. And that cannot be something that is a graph. It can only be a number. So you want to optimize on a certain number. So what we did actually, we made a formula, like a custom-made formula about the steepness in each step from the first to the second and the second to the third. And actually the first to the second is more important than the second to the third. We put that in the formula, and then we have a feature importance distribution score. That is a score again from 0 to 1, 0 being the highest and not realistic, to 1 being the worst. And that is also like a metric that we account for and we track. And then to go a step further, we actually combine our main KPI, which would be the median proportional error, and the feature importance distribution score into a yet a new score, because SageMaker can only select the best model and can only optimize based on one score. So we needed to somehow account for both of them. So we do a harmonic mean of both of them. There's also some hard set rules. So actually we say we care about both, but only if they're comparable. The accuracy remains our most important quality metric. we want to optimize on accuracy first and generalization capacities second. And we will sacrifice a bit of accuracy in favor of more generalization capacity only if, say, for the 2 runs that you're considering, the accuracy scores are comparable, which means in terms of actual numbers, they are not more than 0.02 away from each other in terms of scores. And that's about it, about the setup, how it is. I will discuss a few more challenges we have faced so far and we might be facing in the future. So it comes with the market, and it comes a bit also with the user group that we have for StepStone. We have overwhelmingly more white-collar jobs and blue-collar jobs. And I think that comes as no surprise, because that's the type of people that will actually use our salary planner. Also means that we don't have as much data for blue-collar jobs, and it also means that we're not as capable to make good predictions, reliable predictions or estimations for blue-collar jobs. It's a known fact. We're trying to tackle this via, aggressive campaigns, so like trying to reach out to new markets in different ways. We are aware, and we're trying to change it. We have, well, for Germany, it's not that bad, but we do have still imbalanced gender ratio in the data. I think right now it's around 65% with 35%. It was worse some years ago. We're getting there, but still, it's nowhere near what it should be. It should really reflect more or less the reality of the society we live in. So that also happens. We have very little part-time data. And in the example for the filtering that I showed earlier, I actually showed that we were deleting the part-timers or any type of user that was not a full-time employee. And that was a conscious decision back in the day, because we did not really care about part-time data, because the data is highly noisy, highly irregular, is bound to have all types of irregularities in it. It's bound to not be as easily modelable, if that's a word, modelable. Yeah, it was by choice, by design a while ago. So we did not collect a lot of part-time data, but if we're trying to tackle the problem now after all these years, we have actually done the damage of not collecting the data. So we have very little part-time data. So on top of the problems that come with part-time data that is highly irregular, we also have the problem that we don't have a lot of it. Work in progress, stay tuned. Certain salary bands have very poor representation. I was mentioning earlier, there are certain bands actually that are fully okay, they're fully in the norm, they're legal, they're real values, but because they have no representation in our input data, they might not be quite reliably predicted. So it also comes with the territory of having specific user groups using our questionnaire more and like being the bulk of our users. In terms of the gender pay gap, I mean, you probably have heard a lot about it. Many people try to study. There's always these eye-catching titles in articles. And I think it's also clickbait, to be honest, because like, oh no, now the gender pay gap is this crazy or that crazy. And problem is, there is a gender pay gap, and that is the unquestionable truth. But it's nowhere near as extreme as some of these publications would like you to think. Because to actually make a reliable assessment about a gender pay gap, you should be making certain to begin with that you're comparing the same thing, that you're comparing people in the exact same position, in the exact same circumstances. Now, if there are certain factors that push a certain group of people or gender in those circumstances that actually earn less, other than being in the other circumstances where they could be earning more, that is another problem. It is a valid problem, it's a social problem, but it doesn't really play a lot in the gender pay gap, and it shouldn't be included in studies or like in these numbers that they try to just sell. So what do we do in StepStone for studying this or for tackling this? I mentioned earlier, it is neither a feature nor a dividing factor for training data sets. So we do not have different models for men and women or other genders. We have one model. And although we collect this feature and we could use it, you don't want to use it. You don't want your model to tell a woman user that actually they should learn less because they're a woman. No, that's not an option. Although it is a very difficult assessment to make, to have like a finalized, report, we're still trying to tackle it with a generalized Oaxaca blinder approach, which basically is what I tried to explain a bit earlier, trying to put people exactly in the same circumstances and positions and see if there is a difference, if there would be a difference if they were like that. So if I am to simplify this, to overly simplify this, what this will mean is like try to mathematically describe all the variables that would be for a man employee. So all of their salary would be like an equation. Think about all of the factors that play into salary as an equation, and try to find the equation for women, and try to find the equation for diverse genders. And then try to put women users into the equation of men, and then see if that is actually like, if there is a difference in between what they actually earn and what that equation would make them earn. And that would be the study that we're currently working on. Stay tuned for that. That takes a bit more time because it's an economy study, and I'm told that in the field of economy, research papers usually last like they're around 70 pages, like a whole thesis. So that will be published hopefully sometime in August/September. We are considering other approaches, not to ignore the salary during the estimations, but it's nothing out there yet. So we'll let you know whenever we have something new. When it comes to future work, and I think that's the last bit of my presentation, we want to have salary estimations in more places. So I mentioned we have salary estimations when you fill the questionnaire and that is catered towards you. You have salary estimations when you're looking for listings, when you're looking for a new job and just scrolling through the listings. We actually want to have that in a conversational web journey. We want to have them in a maybe virtual interview. That is such a prototype in works in StepStone at the moment. And it would be great if you're training yourself for an interview and you ask your virtual interview, like, what salary I can expect, and they can give you actually a real reliable range. Job seeker companion, auto agent, also something else, like when you are sent, for instance, this email, like we're being notified about certain open positions. You want to be notified about open positions that are relevant for you, for the salary bands that you deem acceptable. So that's somewhere else that we want to make this magic match happen. We also want to be more transparent to our end users. We want to show a type of confidence score in our estimations so that they know how likely we are to be correct in this assessment, that what we made is actually close to what they could earn. But we also would like to let them know why a certain salary range looks a certain way. So why is it so high or so low, and what can you do? What can you change actually to earn a bit more? What should be maybe your next career step? Actually, if you go to the salary questionnaire and use that and you get your final salary estimation and assessment, you have the option to change some of the fields. And you can see that this range will change depending on how you change the fields. It's a bit interactive in that regard. And you can see that certain fields have a higher impact than others. So certain fields really like influence the salary a lot more than others. So we would also like to maybe in a more transparent way show it to users, apart from them having to play around with different values for the field. That was basically it. So thank you for your attention, and I will be expecting any questions you might have. Please.
So amazing presentation, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a question about the job embeddings that you used with the model. So you said that you use them in the model, but then it's not part of the question, right? So you add the embedding to the model, but how you actually have job description for the salary in the training process.
Okay, so it's not the job description itself, it's the job title that we account for.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question for it?
Okay, yeah, so what's your name? Alexandra. So what Alexandra just asked me right now was that we use job embeddings into our input data, but we do not ask for this type of information through the questionnaire. So how do we come to map these embeddings to a certain job title? Am I right? Okay. So we get the job title and we try to normalize that. What I mean by normalize is, say, you might have different spellings for a certain job title by different people. In the structure that we had, in the ontology that we had, that I showed you a bit earlier, there's roughly 200,000 normalized job titles. So there are people that have actually manually overlooked that all different spellings or different ways of describing a certain job title actually have one unified way of being represented in our ontology, and that would be a normalized job title. And now, whatever we get from our users in the questionnaire, we try to look into our ontology if we have something like that in the ontology. It could be, and in the majority of the cases, we have something like that. And for this particular vector, dense vector representation, we just query this model with this particular normalized job title and try to get something out of it. So if we have the job title in the ontology, chances are this was also in the training data that we used to train this BERT model, because it's trained on data that we have collected through the years in the listings that we have in StepStone. And if we find something similar, I mean, we always find something there, because even if it's not exactly that same job title, it's a space, it's a dense vector space. So you will still find something to actually describe it that is maybe not exactly what the original user had, but it could be similar, or it could be described via other jobs that are in its proximity. So you don't necessarily need to ask a user for information, extra information about that job, because we have the direct information from the ontology. So even in the cases where we don't have that specific job title in our ontology, we might have a discipline for it. We might have something that is close to it, but not quite it. And we have shown that it is better to show something that is closer to that than not have anything and say that we don't know this job title at all. So there are ways that we can make something out of the information, even if it's not explicitly given to us. Does that answer your question?
We have some questions online also, so maybe we can alternate between the two. So there's a question from Sarah. How does the tool work if you don't currently have a job, or if you've worked, for example, in a different currency? Like, if you've immigrated here, maybe it wouldn't be relevant to add your existing data.
Okay, so thank you, Sarah, for your question. So the first one, I think I was just describing it earlier. So if you do not have a specific job title in the ontology, if we do not recognize that, we're still able to place it somewhere in the ontology with similar, or what we think are similar job titles. And that would be job titles within the same realms of discipline or subdiscipline. And we try to infer as much information from all other job titles that we have registered in that discipline, and then maybe like average that out, or like try to aggregate that type of information so that we have something about that job title. And that is one way to tackle it. And when it comes to jobs in different currencies, I was mentioning earlier, we operate in separate markets. So if you're using StepStone Germany, our only currency is in euros, and everything you will see will be based on German data about German companies So if you're giving now information, if you're filling the questionnaire from somewhere else in the world and giving information about your current salary that is not regulated in Germany, then that is not accounted for. That is not something that we would use. We would, if there is too much of a discrepancy between that value and what are normal values in the German market, we probably filter that one out. So this is a tool for people that are currently working in this country, looking for a job again in this country. It's not a tool that can be used cross countries.
Thanks for the great presentation. I had a question about your feature engineering. Did you use SageMaker or did you use maybe Capus or some other algorithm for your feature engineering, for your feature importance?
For the feature importance. Yeah, thank you for your question. So the question was, just to repeat it, whether or not we used in SageMaker any other type of algorithm for calculating the feature importance. And the answer to that is we used a scikit-learn implementation of the feature importance distribution. So you can find whatever, like there are multiple variants to that and there are multiple versions to that. You can choose whatever suits your need. We thought and we decided to go with this one, but there is no particular reason why we couldn't have gone for another implementation of the feature importance distribution. Is there anything else online, maybe?
Yes. There's a question, how, from Taimin, how can we ensure the data is representative if it's user inputted?
That is a very good question. And the answer to that is we can't. No, sorry. There is already, I was mentioning that there are already well-known problems with the user inputted data. So this will lead to there being an overwhelming number of users from a specific user group, be it discipline, be it job title, be it industry they're working in. And that is basically nothing we can do to stop, like, in the collection of the data itself, or it just, the data that we get, we can try to reach out to more users so that it's actually also reflecting the reality of the job market. So there are like as many, say, people in the banking industry as there are approximately in the real job market, and people in finance or people in pharmaceuticals or things like that. But we cannot. It cannot be a true representation of what's happening there, and we are aware of this. So not the greatest answer, sorry about that, but it is like this.
Perfect. There were a couple more questions, but maybe you are open to share how people can reach out to you, because we should switch over.
Yes, so I can just go directly to the first slide and just maybe sign my name. I'm reachable on LinkedIn. You can just look me up by my full name, and I'll be very happy to answer any other questions you might have also here in this room. So thank you for your attention.
Good. Okay. Welcome everyone to my talk where I'll talk about how to increase diversity in open source projects. So a few words about me. What do I think qualifies me to give this talk? First of all, I am from Germany. I grew up near Bremen and then did a PhD in Australia on the intersection of agricultural and environmental science at the University of Queensland. And then I transitioned to data science, worked 2 years as a data scientist. I worked for 2 years as a machine learning engineer after that, and started contributing to open source since 2020, especially to the library scikit-learn. And since October 2021, I'm a PyLadies organizer, PyLadies organizer, and I especially organize monthly open source hack nights, but also talk nights like today. Can people online see me if I stand here, or am I like outside of the camera? Or like maybe, yeah, like this. Okay. Yeah, I unfortunately didn't have a chance to practice my talk because, speaking of open source, I was invited to participate in the scikit-learn co-developer sprint last week in Paris, and I had some trouble getting back on the weekend. My flight was cancelled and I had to rebook, and then I got stranded in Munich and had to sleep over at my brother's place near Munich. I first was supposed to fly with EasyJet and then Lufthansa. Anyway, and then as it turns out, everyone wants to organize events in summer, so catering also wasn't easy. But here we are with food and drinks, and I'm here, so yes. I work here at DP Systel since November last year. And I actually work here in this building as a machine learning engineer. So let's look at the definition of diversity, and I'll read this out loud to you. This is from the Linux Foundation. What is diversity? We define diversity within open source communities as a pluralism of any number of the following possibilities: gender identity and expression, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, social class, caste, language, physical and neurological ability or attributes, religious beliefs, value systems, national origin, and political affiliation. So now that we have an understanding of what diversity is, let's have a look at some data. So if we look at the gender of contributors in open source, we can see that about 82% of contributors are men or identify as male, 14% of people identify as female, and 4% as other. And when we have a look at the percentage of core developers, and now this is very binary, when we have a look at the gender of core developers, we can see that 95% of open source projects don't have female core developers. So this only looked at male versus female, so this doesn't include third genders. But reversely, we can say that only 5% of open source projects have core developers that are not male. And when we have a look at the ethnic distribution of people, we can see that 36% of people who contribute to open source come from the US alone, followed by 36% coming from Europe, followed by 15% from the Asia Pacific region, followed by 8% coming from the Central and South American region, followed by only 5% from Africa and the Middle Eastern region. So we can see here that there's a strong overrepresentation of people from the global north. And so these are only 2 examples of the lack of diversity in open source. There are many other examples, such as age distribution or sexual orientation, but we can't go over all of these right now, so I wanted to show you just 2 examples at least. And so now that we understand the problem a bit better, let's have a look at the consequences. What are the consequences of this lack of diversity? There are consequences for the underrepresented groups as well as for the open source projects. For example, for underrepresented groups, it means especially loss of opportunities, such as loss of skill development or not such good career advancements. For open source project, it means especially a lack of perspectives, such as, or which results in lower problem-solving capacity, a less robust technology, lower productivity, we know this today, and also a susceptibility to unhealthy work environments. So what are the challenges that people face? Mostly the challenges are social. For example, there's a lack of peer parity. For example, there's non-inclusive communication. Some open source projects unfortunately have a toxic culture. I've seen this. I've also seen this being fixed, but it is an issue. There are also expectation issues. For example, new contributors might be expected to work on advanced topics early on. And then there's also gender biasing and stereotyping, and also imposter syndrome. The best definition of imposter syndrome that I have found was on Twitter, where someone twittered, imposter syndrome is high stress, low support. And I think this really summarizes well why especially people from underrepresented groups in tech experience imposter syndrome, because many of them are career changes. And then there are also work-life balance issues. But then apart from these challenges, there are other challenges such as language access. Not everyone's first language is English, or not everyone is proficient in English, but the open source world generally communicates in English. Then there's the educational access problem. For example, people might not be able to attend hackathons or meetups. Like, for example, here in Berlin, we're very privileged that we can attend a meetup like that. And then there's also the geographic access problem. For example, people might live in time zones that are just not great. For example, I lived in Australia, and so many meetings happen at a time that are convenient for people living in Europe or the Americas. And so at that time, it's nighttime in Australia. And then there's also the issue of access to technology. For example, you might not have a good, reliable internet access at home. This is especially true in Africa, for example. I've taken part in open source online sprints where my peer programming partners dropped out because their internet connection simply was just lost. And then there's also the economic and professional access problem. For example, many people are not compensated for their open source contributions, so they need to do it in their free time, and they might not have that free time, especially women when they have children, because most of the childcare work is still placed on women. And also employers might not approve of contributing to open source projects. And generally there's also a lack of sponsorships and mentorships. So now that we understand the challenges, let's have a look at the strategies. So now, what can we do? And one important step is using inclusive language. For example, I still see it a lot that people say guys, like, hey guys, please try to use more gender inclusive language, say folks, or hi people, hi everyone. Also, please don't say master slave, like you can say primary, secondary, you can say primary nodes, secondary nodes. That's much better than master slave that have a problematic historic connotation. And then also, please don't say man hours, you can say engineer hours or personal hours. Also, please don't use derogatory terms such as so simple your mother can do it, and you can say user-friendly instead. That sounds much better. And also, please don't assume someone's gender. People might not identify with the gender that you view them. And then what's also really important is to have a good contributing to documentation and also to keeping it up to date. And here I'm showing an example on the left-hand side from the Pandas project. I wanted to start to contribute to Pandas last year in August, and I simply could not install the development version of Pandas. And so the problem was that their documentation, their contributing to Pandas documentation was simply quite outdated, and also it was incomplete. And so when you followed all the steps, you simply didn't end up with a working development version of Pandas. And so I opened an issue that described the problem, and I started working on fixing the issue together with Noah Tamir, who you might know. She's also very active in open source, and some of the core developers, and the issue got fixed. And now when you follow the instructions, everything should work fine, at least on Linux and Mac. I didn't test it on a Windows computer because I don't have a Windows computer. Then on the right-hand side, there's an example from the scikit-learn project. So when you work in open source, what you need to do quite regularly is that you need to rebuild the project, or like rebuild the extensions. And I noticed that on scikit-learn that it is not well documented, and so I opened an issue for that. And now also that got fixed. I actually just finished the last pull request on this. And so these contributing to documentations when they're up to date really help with lowering the barrier for people to entering open source. Because if you can't even get started to contributing because the contributing documentation is just not good enough, then like that's really a barrier for people for entering open source. And I would also like to say that please don't shame open source developers for not keeping their documentation up to date. Like, for example, I know the Pandas project for quite some time, I think now it's been getting a bit better, has been really underfunded, really understaffed. I know that several of them work on Pandas in their free time, and it was simply not the most important thing to do for the developers to keep the contributing to documentation up to date, because they were simply really busy with just keeping the project together. And then what you can also do is to translate your contributing documentation into different languages. That also really helps people from regions where English might not be the first language, or where people might not be very proficient in English. And so, for example, Data Umbrella, they have run a lot of community online sprints and also in-person sprints. What they have done for a sprint for scikit-learn, so like by sprint I mean a contributing to scikit-learn workshop, is that they translated the contributing to documentation to Portuguese and Spanish, and that really helped the people from South America to contribute to this project. And then another thing what you can do is to be encouraging and be welcoming. Like, for example, if you run an open source project, you can say, thanks a lot for your contribution. This is a valuable addition to the project, or like, we really value your contribution. And this is an example of my first pull request to scikit-learn, where Thomas, one of the core developers, said, Maren Westermann, I see this is your first time contributing, welcome. And this really did make me feel more welcome. Exactly. And another example is this one here from the Pandas project, where one day, so like after I finally managed to contribute to Pandas, one day I had a bit of a shit day. I was feeling sick, and then I saw this pull request review from Marco Gorelli, one of the co-developers of Pandas, where he included a really cute cat gif in this pull request review, and I thought it was just really nice and charming, and it made my day. And I also found a really nice answer that Marco Gorelli wrote on the Pandas community Gitter, and I'll read the question out loud. Someone asked, hey everyone, I'm very new to the community. just did my first couple of contributions to pandas and open source in general. I've really only been able to understand and do issues that are good first issues, and was wondering if anyone has any advice to get better, to be really able to contribute to more complicated issues. And Marco answered, hey, find an issue you're interested in and that you care about, and that'll motivate you to stick to it. And I found that that was a really nice answer, because actually I had the same question. I was like, this is super helpful, and I still have this in mind, like still sometimes, actually not sometimes, quite regularly. When I contribute to especially scikit-learn, I'm like, I'm not sure if I can do this. But then I keep this comment from Marco in mind, and I'm like, yeah, no, just stick to it, you can do it. And yeah, I've done a number of pull requests to scikit-learn now, and yeah, it really shows me that if you are persistent, and if you know where to ask for help, then you can really overcome these barriers. And then it's also really important to promote specific groups and events, like this one. And for example, what you can do if you run an open source project is that you can run these through specific groups. For example, there's Women in Machine Learning and Data Science. Also, PyLadies London, for example, did a number of contributing to pandas, open source hack nights. And here at PyLadies Berlin, we've also done a number of open source hack nights, such as contributing to scikit-learn, contributing to pandas, contributing to Jupyter. We're planning a contributing to Dast night. So yeah, please like and share and promote what we and all the other women and underrepresented groups and tech people are doing. And what you can also do is that you can run events in schools and universities and give priority to people from underrepresented groups. And such as Data Umbrella have done, you can run online events targeted at people from geographically underrepresented regions. They, for example, have run contributing to scikit-learn sprints directed towards people from South America, and another one to people directed to Africa and the Middle East. And there was another one, I think, yeah, there was a second one targeted to people from Africa and the Middle East. And then it's also really important to promote the awareness of the presence of peers. For example, at conferences, this is really important. Make sure that you have speaker diversity. I have seen conferences that take care of this, and the speaker diversity is really good. And I've seen conferences where people don't care, and then the speaker diversity is pretty bad. It makes a big difference. Also, again, like promote peers on social media. You can also write blog articles about what you do, or interview people that you find interesting that are active in these spaces. And you can also simply just recognize people's achievements, for example, on social media. That also really helps. Here, for example, I took a screenshot of a tweet by the scikit-learn team at the EuroPython conference last year. And I noticed that the scikit-learn sprint had the highest number of women on their table. So like all the other open source projects either had like no women on their table, or like one had maybe one woman. And it really showed that the scikit-learn team, the scikit-learn team already put a lot of effort into increasing contributor diversity, and they've been really doing a lot of work in showing that they're open to more diversity, and you could really see that it had an effect, and I really liked that and retweeted that and commented on that. Yeah. And then what's also really important is to de-stereotype the open source software contributor. Like, for example, don't automatically assign community building tasks to underrepresented groups. Like, for example, people might be like, oh yeah, you're a woman, you must like communication. I'm definitely not like that. Like, I'm not good at communication, I would say. At least I'm not super keen to do these things. Yeah, and then also don't say women developers, just simply say developers, so that it's inclusive. Then what's really important is mentorship, and I have a quote here from the Linux Foundation again, where program leaders said mentorship is invaluable to improving diversity and inclusion in open source communities. And that is because it lowers barrier and entry to onboarding, and it really helps with networking. Junior developers can be introduced to the network that senior developers have. And it really helps junior contributors with being able to establishing themselves in the open source world. And it really helps them with career development. And I would like to highlight this book here, Athena Rising, How and Why Men Should Mentor Women. I haven't read it yet, but apparently it's really good, so I'm recommending it here. And then what's also really important is to have paid mentorships and paid internships. And for example, it was last year in April, I complained to some of the scikit-learn co-developers that there are no mentorship programs. And so one of them went to NumFocus, the head organization or the umbrella organization for several open source projects, and asked whether they could get some funding for a 5-month paid internship. And yeah, after some time of reviewing, NumFocus was like, yeah, sure, here's 10,000 euros. So that was amazing. And yeah, we interviewed several people, all of them underrepresented in tech, and found a person that now got the internship. And yeah, she's amazing. And unfortunately, she can't be here today. I think she wanted to come, but no, she's new. Yeah, and she's really doing great progress. Like, I mean, she's now working on scikit-learn full time, and I'm very proud of this achievement, and I'm also a bit jealous because she can do it full time. But I also like working here. Yeah, and then the QuantSite, for example, is running a similar initiative where they have a paid internship, and this really helps people with taking part in open source, because, for example, the scikit-learn intern, she's a mom, and she simply needs to support her family, so without payment, like, it simply wouldn't have been possible for her. Then it's really good to have good governance. The governance board should be representative of different demographics, ideally, and then it's also important to have transparency and accountability around decision making, like, for example, how are leaders determined, how are contributors onboarded and managed and supported. And then it's also important to have transparent career pathways. Unfortunately, this is generally not the case in open source. Slowly changing, it's getting better, but slowly. Then it's also important to promote people from underrepresented groups to leadership roles, and to also value non-coding contributions to the project. There's a lot more work around open source projects, like all social media work, writing blog posts, organizing sprints. That's also all part of the open source world, and it should be acknowledged. And it's also best to try incremental changes over time, like, don't go ahead and like restructure your whole project. It's better to introduce changes step by step and see what works. And then it's really important to create and also enforce a code of conduct, because the code of conduct can signal to marginalized people that the open source community cares. And it also provides good guidance for newcomers and makes them feel more safe. And also provides reference for core values and norms of the project. And it's good to have a dedicated code of conduct team, or if you don't have the resources to do it yourself, then it's also a good idea, if you have the finance, to hire people who follow up on code of conduct breach reports. And now I would like to highlight some literature. So a lot of my points here in my presentation are taken from the research of Bianca Trinkenreich. She's a PhD student, and she does research on diversity and inclusion in open source. In software engineering, not specifically open source, but also open source. And yeah, her work is amazing, so I can recommend to read it. I don't know her in person, unfortunately, but hopefully I'll get to know her one day. And then also I can recommend this great book that we have been highlighting here at PyLadies Berlin before. And I started reading this book, and I have to say, when you read it, you might feel a bit discouraged, because the point that the author is making is that it's not easy to fix the lack of diversity in open source, because there's an underlying unequal representation, there's an underlying unequal distribution of social power in the open source world, or in the tech world in general, which is not easy to fix. And that is certainly true. So she's basically saying, like, don't burn yourself out trying to like fix the whole issue. But what you can definitely do is that you can control your immediate environment. Like, for example, at my previous job, the head of data science was a woman, and she really cared about diversity and inclusion, and she built a really diverse team. And then around the time I joined, she left. And then slowly over time, all of her work disappeared, and the diversity within the data science department just went back to the general default. And also here at Deutsche Bahn and the sub-company DB System, for example, there's a strong initiative to promote women to leadership roles. So like every day I get an email saying like, dear women at Deutsche Bahn, there's this leadership role, please apply. Like every day my feed is full of it. And so, for example, Deutsche Bahn has set a goal of filling 30% of leadership roles by 2025 with women, and that goal has almost been achieved. I think it's at like 28% or something like that. Yeah, you've been talking about it before. So yeah, there are definitely things you can do, but it does require like active outreach, active participation. It's been a long day. Yeah, so like it doesn't come out of nowhere. Like you really need to be proactive. But yeah, you can definitely change your immediate environment, and that will have ripple effects, definitely. And yeah, I would like to leave you with that. And if you like, please connect. Thank you.
So if folks have questions.
Yes.
It's not really a question, but I wanted to say that the Open Hack Nights that you guys hold in Berlin are incredibly cool.
Thanks.
I didn't continue on my scikit-learn journey yet, but I felt super welcomed and super encouraged. It felt like it was possible.
Thank you. I hope you are aware of the community Discord. If not, we can talk about it later. Okay, good.
Could you maybe rephrase it for the people who probably didn't hear?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so the comment was that the person who just, made the comment, said that they really like the open source hack nights, and yeah, the person wants to follow up on the scikit-learn issue they opened, or pull request that they opened, and there's a scikit-learn community Discord channel for everyone who doesn't know, for example, where everyone can just ask questions if they get stuck on contributing. Yes, Jessica.
How do you stay positive when the state of things still feels so backwards?
Yeah, I know. So the question was, how do you stay positive? And admittedly, it can be challenging. Especially when I feel tired and exhausted. I sometimes have times where I just feel angry about the current state, like that women still get so discriminated against. Like, for example, technology is still kind of a boys thing. Like when you look at IT students, like most of them are still male, for example. It hasn't changed. Like it was the same when I was a teenager, and it's still the same. So it can be very frustrating. But I can also see progress, for example. Like, for example, I was thinking recently or it would be really great to like have IT, like mandatory IT education in schools. And this is not the case in Germany, but I found out it's the case in many other countries. So that's really great, because then female and like female students and also students, high school students of other genders can then see like, oh, I can actually really do this. And also I have another anecdote. I've been organizing Reclaim the Night in Brisbane, where I lived, which is a public, well, you can call it a public awareness campaign, but you can also call it a demonstration against, for raising awareness of sexual violence against women. And one of the organizers, she's a social worker, and at one point she had a moment of doubt, and she was saying, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I feel like there is just simply no change. And that was in 2016. And then in 2017, Me Too happened, and then suddenly there was a big change. So often it feels like you're doing all of this work and you feel like there is no progress, but like with every little bit, like you make some progress. And like, sure, maybe sometimes you go some steps backwards, but like you need to be patient and persistent. And like, there will be times where it feels like there's no change, and then maybe after several years, it can take years, like suddenly there's a big shift. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to keep in mind.
Then thank you very much again, Maren.
And yeah, please help yourself to pizza, and if there's pizza left over, please take it home. If you want. There's so many.
We have the raffle now.
Oh yeah, the raffle.
Say goodbye to folks at home.
Yeah. Oh,
You can say goodbye.
okay. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you had a good time. Thanks a lot, and hope to see you soon, either online or in person.